In October of 1980, residents in Rome, Ohio began experiencing strange phenomenon. Mysterious lights were appearing in the sky, strange creatures roamed the area, and animals were found mutilated. Nobody seemed to have any plausible answers about what was happening. And even worse, there was no way for anyone to defend themselves against these unwanted visitors. Today's case highlights the strange occurrences that have been happening across rural America for decades. The unexplainable sightings and bizarre encounters that take place just outside the city limits. I'm Brooke, and today we'll be exploring the strange events that took place in Rome, Ohio. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Armchair Investigator. Today's story doesn't have a lot of names. In fact, most have asked to remain anonymous. People who experience events like the one you're about to hear often walk away with transformed realities, questioning everything they ever thought to be true. And yet, they hesitate to talk about these incidents because they don't want to be associated with them. It all started with a dream. Well, what everyone in Robert's family thought was a dream. See, in October of 1980, his 16-year-old son had been woken up by something staring in his window, and it was downright terrifying. Everyone chalked it up to one of those realistic nightmares and didn't give any more thought to the matter until much later. Maybe it hadn't been a dream after all. In December of that same year, a deer had been found in a nearby forest with its side gruesomely cut open. And while nobody was sure exactly what happened, it appeared that whatever had done this had massive claws. An almost forgettable dream in October, a strange death in December. Then in May of 1981, a group of Amish were preparing to cut wood on Robert's property. They had hauled in roughly 600 pounds of horse feed to the area to keep their workhorses happily fed. The next morning, when the men showed up for work, all 600 pounds of the horse feed had been cut open. And, just like the deer that had been found months earlier, the feed bags appeared to have been torn open by claws. The next day, Robert heard shots being fired from the same area the men were working. Their horse had been injured. And while the men were visibly shaken up, they didn't want to talk about what happened. They told Robert that they had been shooting at snakes. But Robert could tell by the injury to their horse that whatever had caused this wasn't from a snake. The horse's side had clearly been attacked, resulting in 1.5-inch deep claw marks. The men brought in a new horse, but it wasn't long before they had abandoned the area altogether, even leaving their equipment behind. Whatever they had seen, it frightened them enough that they didn't come back to collect their stuff for over a month. During the winter of 1980, a gas well was drilled into Robert's property. In preparation for the well, a large area to the west of the house had been cleared. Then, in June of 1981, a gas line was installed that ran north and south for about half a mile, running through dense forest. A bulldoze operator who had been clearing the area came upon a roughly 40-foot square patch of land that had been completely stripped. We're talking no grass, no weeds, not even any rocks were left behind. 4 holes were found in the ground that were about the size of 50-gallon oil drums. Later, when he told Robert what he had seen, Robert was stumped. He didn't know how the holes or clearing had gotten there, or who did it. Robert asked him if he went around the spot, to which the man replied, "I don't get paid to go around, I get paid to go through." On June 15, 1981, around the same time the gas line was being installed, Robert had 4 ducks and a chicken go missing. When he later found them beyond the wood line, he was disturbed by what he saw. His ducks had been killed. Well, not just killed, they had been mutilated, and it was clear that they hadn't been used for food. Their heads had been bitten off, and each duck had a large bite mark to their stomach. Robert quietly buried his ducks and kept what he had seen to himself. There was no way he could even begin to explain the large footprints and claw marks in the area. About half a mile south from Robert's farm, it was discovered that a large sawdust pile had big holes dug into it. Was this the work of a groundhog or a raccoon? It didn't seem possible. On the evening of June 25th, Robert and his sons noticed that their ducks were agitated. As the men set out to investigate what was bothering them, they didn't have to look far. Chasing after their birds was a creature they had never seen before. The men described it as a black form with 2 red glowing eyes, and it was running on all 4s. Acting quickly, one of the boys shined a flashlight in the creature's eyes, as Robert shot it with his .410 shotgun. Before he could reload, the creature screamed and took off west down the field. Its screams were unlike anything they had heard before, alternating from high pitch to low pitch. It was absolutely terrifying. Even with it out of sight, they could still hear it screaming. Whatever it was, Robert had definitely hit it. The men estimated the creature was 7 to 8 feet tall. That night, the entire family found it difficult to sleep. What was that thing, and was it coming back? They wouldn't have to wait long for an answer. Around 2 a.m., as Robert sat watching TV, trying to get his mind off of what he and his boys had encountered a few hours earlier, their dog began viciously barking. Then, just as suddenly, the barking turned into whimpers. Something was definitely in their yard. As Robert stepped out the back door with a flashlight in his hand, he saw the dog trying to hide under their lawnmower. What in the world was going on? As Robert shined his flashlight around the yard, trying to see what, if anything, was out there, he spotted it. A black, gorilla-like creature with 2 bright red eyes. And it was staring directly at Robert. As Robert centered his flashlight on the creature, he was horrified. Its teeth, its size. The creature began growling and snorting. Robert said it felt like he was going to have a heart attack. As he ran back inside the house, he shouted for his sons to get up and get dressed. That's when the creature began heading west around the house, yelling as it made its way down the field. The boys jumped in their truck, attempting to chase down whatever was in their yard. They couldn't spot it. But maybe they weren't the only ones who had seen something strange. They drove half a mile down the road to their neighbor's house, but they hadn't seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. As Robert and his sons slowly made their way back home, they realized they weren't alone. It seemed like something was running alongside their pickup. They could hear the brush next to them rustling and moving about, but they couldn't see anything. And then their truck suddenly shut off. Nobody could understand what was happening. It hadn't run out of gas. In fact, it had a full tank. And even though the engine had died, the headlights stayed on. Another neighbor, making his way down the road, stopped and asked Robert what was going on. Why were he and his sons just stopped in the middle of the road like that? Before Robert could answer, the neighbor too began hearing something moving in the brush next to the road. As Robert began relaying what he and his sons had experienced, the neighbor had a story of his own. The neighbor told Robert that his sons had been camping in their backyard when they came running inside, claiming to have heard growling noises and had seen something that looked like a bear. His kids were so freaked out by what they had seen and heard that they stopped camping outside altogether. Robert's truck eventually started back up, and he and his sons made their way back home to keep watch. A patrol of the yard uncovered that an electrical cord that ran from their hoist to their barn had been broken. A gorilla? A bear? What were they dealing with? Because Robert had seen the creature from less than 30 feet away, he got a good look at it. Robert estimated that the creature he had seen in his backyard was about 9.5 feet tall. It had been standing next to a 12-foot-tall hoist, and its eyes were parallel with a 2x4 on it. The creature had long, shaggy hair that was either black or dark brown. Its eyes were glowing red and about the size of baseballs. It had a big, flat, push-down nose and shark-like teeth that seemed to be about 1.5 inches long. It stood upright and had arms that hung below its waist. To Robert, it was very much built like a gorilla. He also noted that its chest had small white patches over the breast area. The family was deeply unsettled. They still didn't know what they were dealing with, and even worse, when they might encounter another one of those creatures. Leaving the house didn't seem safe. And how could it when something so massive and terrifying was visiting their property? On June 28th, they canceled their plans to play music at a local gathering. As darkness fell that night, strange figures began appearing at the edge of the woods. What did they want, and why were they targeting them? As their fear turned into anger, Robert's family decided they weren't going to sit back and hide. Starting up their tractor, they drove out into the field to confront whatever was lurking there. That's when they noticed a black form waving some sort of dark blue light back and forth. As one of the sons prepared to shoot, the light went out, and the dark form disappeared. As they made their way further into the field, more creatures with red glowing eyes began making their presence known. The men opened fire on the unwanted visitors, emptying 2 full boxes of 12-gauge shotgun shells before they were finished. They managed to hit one of the creatures that had been standing near a shallow pond. As it was hit, it fell to the left of the pond, landing flat on its stomach. Not wanting the creature to get away, the men kept shooting. But their guns didn't seem to deter the visitors. 2 more pairs of red glowing eyes emerged from the tree line to check on their fallen friend. As the men opened fire again, one creature took off to the west, while another headed east. Fearing they were under siege, the family quickly made their way back to the safety of their house, taking turns patrolling the perimeter, all while seeing dark forms running in and out of the tree line. Surely with such large creatures roaming the property, evidence had to have been left behind, right? Well, listen to this. Days later, on July 1st, large circular footprints with 3 toe-like extensions were found in the area around the tree line opening. They measured 7 inches wide and roughly 8 inches long. Casts were taken to preserve the prints. Robert believed these footprints were from their very first encounter with the creatures on June 25th. In total, more than 40 impressions were found around the property, starting from the side of the house, crossing the field, and heading towards the gas wells west of the property. The trail of footprints showed unusual movement. At times, there was a 6-foot stride between prints. Other times, the trail disappeared altogether before randomly continuing. It appeared that whatever had made them was walking on 2 legs, but also had the ability to run on all 4s, as Robert and his sons had witnessed when the creature chased their ducks. Other trails showed the creatures circling the property before dropping down on all 4s at the back of Robert's house. Nobody had seen anything like this. The footprints themselves were puzzling, as was the description of the creatures. To try and come up with a logical, plausible answer, researchers were forced to look at the unthinkable.
The monster that Mrs. Baxter saw was 12 feet tall, as tall as these bushes behind me. Her story is similar to dozens of others told every year in this area about people who got fleeting glimpses of the big...
Bloomfield's a small town about 40 miles to the southeast of Louisville. Its population is about 1,100. But don't think that because it's small, nothing ever happens here. In Bloomfield and the communities surrounding it, UFO sightings has become almost a nightly experience.
On June 29th, the Ashtabula County Sheriff's Department received 2 calls from Robert's home, one at 5 a.m. and the other at 11 p.m. The second call came from a woman in the home saying, "They didn't want me to do it, but I just couldn't take it another minute. The forms were back and I'm calling the Sheriff's Department." With the sheriff made aware of what Robert's family was experiencing, he came out to the home and looked around. The sheriff did see large footprints and noticed that the ground had been disturbed in a number of places around Robert's property. The police report he took at 5 a.m. read, Robert S. reported that on Wednesday and Thursday evening of late last week, he and his family were awakened by loud growling and activity in the front and backyard. When he went to check the disturbance, they reportedly saw a large black-colored animal standing about 7 to 9 feet tall. Each time they shined a light on the animal or attempted to shoot it, it would run off into the woods. Last evening, the animal returned and was in the north field behind the house. Robert S. and his sons chased the animals towards a clearing in the north tree line, where they said they saw 3 pairs of large eyes. They fired several shots at the animals and were waiting for daylight to check for any signs. I checked the area along with Mr. S. and saw no signs of blood or tissue. We did discover a few large prints in the ground, but they were distorted. Mr. S. said he called our offices and Game Warden Kelly last week and was told nothing could be done unless clear prints were obtained. Mr. S. mentioned that he had lost 4 ducks and a chicken since the activity had started and advised of other incidents where horses belonging to Amish loggers and other farm animals had been attacked. The police report at 11 o'clock said, "I arrived at the above location and met with the Robert S. family. They explained that they had been hearing strange noises around their property for the last week or so. Mr. S. said that they have seen a huge animal also at nighttime. He said that it looked and stood about 9 feet tall. The animal makes a loud growl. He said it looks like it could be a bear. It has always been dark when they see it, so he hasn't gotten a real good look at it. They have found large paw marks in the ground around his property. Deputy D came to the scene with a large shotgun, and Sergeant F arrived also. We checked the area with our spotlights but didn't see anything. Resumed patrol. Since June 25th, Robert's family had been dealing with something altogether strange and terrifying. They had been spending their days patrolling the property and keeping a lookout on the roof of their house. In the evening hours of July 1st, 2 family members who had been on the roof began seeing lights that hovered just over top of the back of their tree line. There were 4 lights in total that were spaced evenly along the tree line and changed color, going from red to blue to yellow and then nearly black. They estimated that these hovering objects were roughly the size of basketballs held at arm's length. They knew that whatever was hovering above the tree line was massive because it had the ability to completely light a half-an-acre field as if it were as bright as day. As the family watched the lights from their roof, they heard a scream coming from the edge of the woods that sounded as if it came from a woman. The objects hovering above the trees went dark, and outlines could be seen running along the edge of the trees. The family began shooting at the forms, watching the woodline as red glowing eyes stared back at them. And unlike the black forms, the creatures with red eyes didn't seem to be affected by bullets. The family began to suspect that the glowing eyes were being used to distract from the dark forms. Later, 2 forms with red glowing eyes made their way to the side of the field and stood next to the barn. The family tried talking to them from up on the roof, but never managed to establish contact. As the family stood guard, they saw their horse standing in the field, except they knew it wasn't their horse, because theirs was locked up, and they knew it hadn't gotten out. Were these dark forms somehow able to shapeshift? Willing to bet on their horse's life, 2 members shot at whatever was standing on their property. The creature screamed, growled, and took off towards the northeast part of the field. The men came down from the roof and walked out to the field where the horse had been standing. Besides a few strange prints, nothing else was found. Around 3:30 in the morning, in the field across the street, a bright white light appeared above the corn. One family member who had been looking toward the light said he could actually feel the ray of light hit his head. He described it as being so intense that he nearly passed out. An hour later, around 4:30, a glowing red object landed in a tree east of the house. The men watched as a small owl-like creature jumped from branch to branch before shooting at it. The creature fell to the ground, got up, and bolted down the tree line, except now it was on all 4s. At one point during the night, an object shaped like a cigar box had flown directly over top of the farmhouse. The family noted that it had blue lights going around it with a red light in the middle. When they shot at it, they said it sounded as if they had hit glass. The object continued heading southeast over the house, across the street, and towards the cornfields. And perhaps even most perplexing of all, the object itself was able to move through the sky completely silent, making no noise or producing any sound. On July 1st, researcher Dennis Pilichis arrived on the scene. You see, he had heard about the unusual activity occurring on Robert's farm and wanted to see things for himself. He said, "When I first came on the scene, I found obvious things right off that substantiated their story. There were 2 ladders up against the family house. Up on the roof were coffee cups, flashlights, and coats. The yard was covered in spent shotgun shells. The family was in a great state of agitation and stress, appearing to be honest, troubled, and confused by what they were going through." The Valley News ran a story about what was happening. A Rome family has reported a large mystery animal roaming around its home and terrorizing horses and other farm livestock. The family on Johnson Road reported that it shot at the black animal described as between 7 to 9 feet tall Sunday. Sheriff deputies did not find any animal, but did find some large footprints near the home. The animal reportedly showed up Wednesday. Growling and commotion in the yard awakened them. The family said every time they shined a light on the animal, it would return to the woods. The animal came back Sunday, and the family chased it into a clearing where several shots were fired. It is unknown if the animal was hit. The family said since it came to the property, 4 ducks and some chickens have disappeared. By July 4th, Robert and his family were certain that another siege was coming when a strange fog appeared over their property. Sure enough, in the field behind their house, the family saw 2 black forms heading their way. They watched the forms for about 15 minutes before shooting at one of them. The creature fell to the ground and began screaming. A minute later, it got up and ran away. The men quickly went out to the field to see if any evidence had been left behind. and there in the dirt were 4 footprints. They measured 14 inches long and 6 inches wide. There was a 19-inch stride between the first and second print, a 43-inch stride between the second and third print, and a 17-inch stride between the third and fourth one. Similar prints were later found around the property as well as by the gas wells on September 11th. Black forms, creatures with red glowing eyes, 3-toed impressions. It was as if Robert's property was some sort of magnet for these cryptid beasts. A barbed wire fence was installed around the front of the house and the yard. Robert wasn't taking any chances. It seemed like new creatures were constantly appearing. The beasts showing up around Robert's property seemed to be getting braver and braver. They were officially too close for comfort. On July 6th, around 4:30 in the morning, as Robert was getting ready to drive his wife to work, he began hearing noises in the front yard. Grabbing his flashlight as quickly as he could, Robert managed to catch a glimpse of a large black-formed creature that was walking on 2 legs, running off towards the road. The creature had come way too close to the house and was attempting to look in the window on their front porch. It had left behind 18-inch long, 5-toed impressions by the window, the front porch, and in the driveway. 18 inches long. To put that into perspective, the foot of an average adult European American male is about 10.5 inches long. Former NBA basketball player Shaquille O'Neal, who is 7'1", has feet that measure 16 inches long. Later, as the group examined the woods north of the house, 3-toed footprints and large hoof marks were found. And that wasn't all. A nearby grass field also contained 5-toed footprints. And strangely, all the grass around the footprints were swirled in a clockwise direction. In total, 5 footprints had this swirl effect, and they were spaced 6 feet apart. The grass in the rest of the field was completely normal. During the early evening hours of July 7th, researchers Willard McIntyre and Dennis Pilichis arrived at the property to investigate. Robert's family was preparing for another night of patrolling. As night fell, one of the family members saw red glowing eyes in the woods behind the house. Dennis, Willard, 2 family members, and a friend went to check things out. As the group approached the wood line, a glowing form stepped out onto the other side of the field. Shots were fired at the creature, who then fell down. The group rushed toward the creature, but all that remained was a trampled path that looked as if something had dragged itself into the forest. Not knowing if something was waiting for them, the group decided to see if they could spook something up. As Dennis and Willard began throwing rocks into the woods, something began throwing rocks back. The group noticed glowing red eyes moving towards the east side of the house, and quickly made their way back home. For the rest of the night into the early morning hours, they watched as creatures of all sorts and sizes with red glowing eyes moved about the trees surrounding the home. Approaching them was no use, as the creatures only retreated further back into the woods. With Dennis and Willard having seen the creatures for themselves, they wanted to see if they could capture one, or at the very least, get one on film. Willard McIntyre devised a plan. Because these creatures seemed to like ducks and other small game, the idea was to try and lure them out with one. A cyanide capsule would be placed in the bait that would, in theory, kill whatever bit into it. And Robert was on board. Not only were the creatures visiting his home frightening, but they were also wreaking havoc on his property. Chickens were being killed, building materials and tools were being thrown about, siding was ripped off the home, and their home's fuse box had been smashed in. No one could offer any explanation for the damage. Robert's gas wells were also being targeted. On 3 separate occasions, the electronic control box that monitors pressure on the well had been crushed, along with 6 D-cell batteries. And just like with the things that were damaged at the house, the gas maintenance crew couldn't offer any explanation for the well damage or what might be causing it. The creatures also seemed to be expanding their radius. They were now venturing across the Grand River, west of Robert's property, leaving behind massive 20-inch footprints as proof. In mid-July, another family in the area had started hearing growling and screaming on their property late at night. Thinking it was wild pigs, they half-heartedly attempted to scare them off. On July 8th, the Valley News prints another story. Rome's strange beast. Is it fact or fantasy? Principal figures involved in the mystery of a strange beast or beasts that once again are being reported on Johnson Road here are refusing to comment or talk to the media. The Valley News has learned at least 3 area residents spotted what they believed is a 9-foot-tall animal which walks on its hind legs Thursday night in the same area where sheriff deputies found large footprints a week ago. Ducks and chickens continue to be found dead or missing in the same area. Other residents on Johnson Road feel the creature might be a bear. One longtime resident in the area reported hearing grunting and growling sounds from the woods this week, and he remembers bears in the area many years ago and feels there might be 1 or 2 who still live in the thick, rugged county near the Grand River by Johnson Road. One Rome resident had reportedly made plaster casts of the creature's footprints, but most area residents are passing off the sightings as nothing more than someone's vivid imagination. However, one person whom the Valley News contacted swore the creature is real and is not a bear. With the group's plan to lure and trap a creature finalized, on Friday, August 22nd, they set it in motion. Just before 9:30 p.m., the group placed their bait traps in an open field. Using 1,200-pound test parachute cord, they tied one end to the bait and the other end to metal milk crates. A tape loop of rabbits screaming was played to attract the beasts. Just as they had finished setting the last trap, the men noticed multiple sets of red glowing eyes near the woodline as well as by the gas well. The creatures looked like they were getting ready to run for the bait. At the same time, white glowing lights began flashing from the woods. Suddenly, the men weren't sure if their plan had been a good idea after all. Was the property going to be overrun? Had they created a frenzy? They didn't stick around long enough to find out. One of Robert's cows was due to give birth, and everyone was on edge over the notion of the creatures taking the calf. You see, earlier in the month, a local farmer had had 4 of his beef cattle go missing. A large pool of blood was found near his herd. One night, as the farmer made his rounds, he saw a creature that stood 8 to 9 feet tall running off with a newborn calf under its arm. The farmer shot at it with a .30-30 hunting rifle, hitting it in the left shoulder. He was sure he had hit it, because he said it screamed and its left shoulder had dropped as if injured. And yet the creature continued running, jumping a 4-foot fence in the process. The group kept a close eye on the rabbit traps all night. They hadn't been touched. In the early morning hours of August 23rd, Robert drove his wife to work. Upon returning home, he checked the traps once more. All 3 were still in place. Later that morning, when the traps were checked again, the rabbit furthest from the road was missing. The metal crate it was tied to was tipped over, and the parachute cord was snapped in half, almost as if it had exploded. Large 5-toed footprint impressions were left all around the crate, with some measuring 18 inches long. The middle rabbit was still under its crate, but had a puncture wound on its stomach. The footprints left around the crate were much smaller, measuring 10 inches long. The snapped parachute cord was later examined at a forensic laboratory, where it was determined that it hadn't been cut with a knife, nor had it been chewed. While these encounters were happening in Rome, Rock Creek, a village about 4 miles north, was experiencing something similar. A young man there claimed he'd been chased down by something not of this world. He said that one night in mid-June, he had been walking from his home to his grandparents'. It was around midnight. The moon was out, and it was a clear, nice night. He decided to take his usual route, a shortcut through the woods. You see, at one point, the trail had been part of a railway line, but the track had long been removed, leaving a gravel path about 15 foot wide, with dense forest on each side. Nearby was an old cemetery, a swampy area, and a number of gas and oil wells. As the young man made his way down the path towards his grandparents', he began hearing a strange grunting noise coming from the woods. It wasn't until he heard the grunting noise coming from behind him that he stopped and turned around. Standing on the path about 20 feet away was a black, hairy creature that stood about 9 feet tall. The man said it looked like an overgrown gorilla, with long arms that hung below its waist. Knowing that the single-shot .22 he had with him would be useless against an animal this size, the young man did the only thing he could. He ran. And the creature followed. The man could hear the heavy stomping of feet behind him. There was no doubt about it. If the creature wanted to hurt him, he could. When the man slowed to catch his breath, the creature slowed down too and began making weird noises. This went on for a while. Whenever the man slowed down, the creature did too, keeping about a 15-foot distance behind him. When the man started running again, the creature easily kept pace with him. As he got closer to his grandparents, he veered off onto a motorcycle path he had made through the cornfield. It was a straight shot to the house. For whatever reason, the creature didn't follow him, choosing to instead stay on the old railway path and watch. When the young man safely reached his grandparents' house, his grandmother could see how upset and distraught her grandson was. She had never seen him like this before. He was sweating, shaking, and clearly rattled. A few days after the incident, the man, along with 2 of his friends, went back to the area where he had been chased, hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature. As the men hung around on the old railway path, they eventually began hearing strange noises, along with movement in the brush. To everyone's shock, a creature stuck its head out of the woodline. One of the men panicked and shot at it. The creature fell down, quickly got back up, and ran off into the woods screaming. And while the creature from the second encounter looked similar to the first creature, it was clear that they weren't the same thing. The creature the 3 men had seen had one eye that was far off to the side of its face, while the other eye seemed normal. The 2 encounters the young man had were unexplainable, and unless you were there, they were nearly unbelievable. And sure, the creature was frightening, there was no doubt about it, but the young man's curiosity had gotten the best of him. He needed to know more about what he had seen. Night after night, he visited the area, waiting for another encounter with the creature. But none came, until October 9th. On the evening of Friday, October 9th, the young man and 2 of his friends were walking down the old railroad tracks when they saw a big black form step out from the woods and onto the gravel path about 200 feet in front of them. At first, they thought it was a hunter. After all, it was hunting season in Ohio. But then the outline started running towards them, almost like it was charging them. When the form got about 100 feet away, they could see that it wasn't a person. It was one of those mysterious creatures they had seen over the summer. Seeing the creature running right for them was enough. They weren't going to stick around to see what it wanted. Later, a 3-toed, 14-inch long footprint was found where the young man would sit and scope out the area, hoping for another sighting. Was the creature being territorial? Perhaps it was sending a message that it wanted to be left alone. On October 11th, another footprint was discovered, measuring 12 inches long and 8.5 inches wide. 3 other prints were found, leading to a large tree that had recently been damaged and was missing limbs. Unlike the encounters to the south in Rome, none of the creatures in Rock Creek were bothering the residents' homes. All of the activity was centered around one area of the railroad tracks. Some say that what happened to residents in Rome, Ohio, and nearby areas experienced overlapping UFO activity. Some say it was Bigfoot, while others say it was both. One thing that stands out to me with the creatures visiting both Rome and Rock Creek was the natural gas wells. Could those wells have anything to do with the strange visits? It wouldn't be the first time that UFOs were spotted around oil drilling sites and natural gas reservoirs. On several occasions in 2012, drillers in southern Texas saw strange lights hovering above the Eagle Ford shale drilling area.
Well, now we're going to turn our attention toward the skies, specifically to some strange lights that some of your neighbors out near the Eagle Ford shale oil fields say they've seen. Reporter David Sears with our ABC affiliate in San Antonio takes a closer look.
You've got 3 distinct lights.
Pictures from oil rig security cameras.
It's hovering above us.
Videos from oil rig workers. And eyewitness accounts from ranchers.
Somewhere out there, there's something.
Are we alone? It seems like UFO sightings are occurring more frequently over the Eagle Ford Shale.
In 2017, crew members of an offshore supply vessel in the Gulf of Mexico claimed to have seen a UFO 5 times the size of their ship hovering near an oil rig. One witness said, "Close to 7:00 p.m. on March 21st, just before dusk, myself and 4 other crew members aboard our vessel saw a craft that appeared to be 5 times our 240-foot vessel in length. My line of sight was about 1/4 of a mile from our vessel. There was a big rig behind the craft about 1/2 mile. I used this to help gauge the size of the craft. The sighting was approximately 80 miles southeast of New Orleans. The scene lasted about 40 seconds. The craft rose up out of the water about 40 foot. No water was dripping from the craft. Within a split second, the craft disappeared at a 30-degree angle into the sky. Within seconds, it had disappeared completely. I can say for sure that the craft was dark-colored, oval in shape, and made no sound whatsoever. Could it be that aliens are interested in Earth's natural resources? Nobody knows for sure. What we do know is that for decades, rural America has been under siege by something that cannot be trapped, shot, photographed, or hunted. I want to hear from you. Had you heard about the events in Rome, Ohio before today's video? Do you believe in aliens, or do you think these stories are nothing more than a hoax? I will say a lot of strange things happen in Ohio. What occurred in 1981 is far from the only odd encounter to take place there. If you're from Ohio, chime in with any strange events you've experienced. If you enjoyed today's video, give it a thumbs up, and hey, while you're at it, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on the next investigation.